But they were reasonably mature things that even today stand.
The Twilight Zone remains one of the most unforgettable shows in television history. But hidden inside one episode is a scene so disturbing and so historically explosive music that CBS quietly locked it away for over 50 years. Behind the eerie music and Rod Serling's calm narration were angry sponsors, secret production disasters, visible mistakes the producers prayed nobody would notice, and a story so controversial that even one of the stars later regretted being part of it. Once you see the scene they tried to bury, you will finally understand the disaster they created. The birth of the Twilight Zone. Rod Serling was one of the most respected television writers of his generation. But respect did not protect him from the censors. Every time he tried to write about racism, war, or political corruption, the network executives and corporate sponsors found reasons to cut his lines, change his endings, or kill his projects entirely. He grew tired of fighting. Battles he could not win, so he invented a new way to fight. He would hide his most controversial ideas inside science fiction stories, where monsters and aliens and mysterious visitors from another dimension could say things that human characters were not allowed to say. The result was The Twilight Zone, a show that changed television forever. But behind the scenes, the production was plagued by secrets, accidents, and footage that the producers tried very hard to make sure the audience never saw. Rod Serling pitched The Twilight Zone as a way to break free from the corporate censorship that had plagued his previous live television dramas. He had written serious, socially conscious plays for shows like Playhouse 90 and Kraft Television Theater, and he had won Emmy Awards for his trouble. But the awards did not give him creative freedom. Every script he submitted had to be approved by network executives who were terrified of offending sponsors. And every sponsor was terrified of offending viewers. Serling realized that the only way to write about controversial subjects without triggering the censors, was to disguise those subjects as something else. If he wrote a story about racism, the network would kill it. If he wrote a story about an astronaut who hated aliens because they looked different, the network would call it science fiction and let it pass. To produce the show, Serling founded a company called Cauga Productions, which he named after Cauga Lake in New York. The name was personal. Music, a small piece of his private life, attached to a project that would consume his public one. Cauga Productions gave Serling the independence he needed to develop The Twilight Zone without constant interference from studio executives who did not understand what he was trying to do. The company was small, the budget was tight, and the future was uncertain. But Serling had a vision, and he was willing to fight for it. The initial pilot concept for the show was titled The Time Element, and it was written in 1958 as a potential episode of a different anthology series. CBS executives read the script, and shelved it immediately, convinced that it was too strange for American audiences. But another producer named Bert Grayer saw something in the script that the CBS executives' had missed. He arranged for the time element to air on a different program, Westinghouse Desolate Playhouse, and the response from viewers was overwhelming. The network received a large wave of fan mail from people who wanted to see more stories like this one. That response helped convince CBS to move ahead with The Twilight Zone, and Serling finally got the green light he had been waiting for. The casting strategy for the show was unusual. The Twilight Zone deliberately avoided hiring top-tier Hollywood movie stars, partly because the budget could not afford them, and partly because Serling wanted audiences to focus on the stories rather than the faces. Instead, the show operated as an incubator for up-and-coming talent and veteran character actors who could be counted on to deliver strong performances without demanding star treatment. Over the course of the series, The Twilight Zone served as an early career launch pad for actors who would later become cultural icons. William Shatner appeared in an episode called Nick of Time Years before he captained the Starship Enterprise. Robert Redford appeared in Nothing in the Dark before he became a Sundance legend. Burt Reynolds appeared in The Bard before he grew his mustache and became a box office champion. Robert Duvall appeared in Miniature before he established himself as one of the finest actors of his generation. The list of future stars who passed through The Twilight Zone is astonishing, and it speaks to the quality of material that drew talented actors even when the pay music was low. Rod Serling never intended to be the on-screen host or narrator of his own show. He was a writer, not a performer, and he had no desire to become a television personality. The production team initially approached legendary actor Orson Welles to record the narration, hoping that his voice would give the show the gravity music it needed. Welles turned them down, and other choices proved music too expensive for the show's modest budget. With no other options left, Serling stepped in front of the camera himself, reluctantly accepting the role that would define his public image for the rest of his life. His distinct music, clipped delivery, the way he paused between phrases and leaned into certain words became the definitive signature of the series. Generations of viewers who cannot name a single episode can SD Ion in the episode, but he has never stopped wishing that the script had been different. The Twilight Zone was a show about fear, prejudice, and the darkness that lives inside ordinary people. Some of its best episodes hold up as timeless warnings about the dangers of hatred and ignorance. But The Encounter is not one of them. It'll imitate music the way Serling said, submitted for your approval. The vast majority of the series was filmed on the iconic Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer backlit in Culver City, California. The show frequently recycled massive standing sets music from classic MGM movies, a cost-saving measure that Serling turned into a creative advantage. The futuristic city streets and the small music town squares were the exact same sets that had been built for big-budget MGM features. The reuse was not always seamless, but it gave the show a distinctive visual texture music that cheaply built sets could not replicate. Because computer-generated imagery did not exist in the late 1950s and early 60s, the series relied heavily music on practical and camera optical illusions managed by director of photography George T. Clements. Clements used music force perspective to make ordinary rooms look impossibly large or small. He used split-screen glass matte paintings to create backgrounds that did not exist. He used reverse motion filming to make objects appear to move backwards or people appear to defy gravity. Every supernatural phenomenon that appeared on screen was created live on celluloid without relying on expensive music, post-production laboratory optical. The work was painstaking. The margin for error was small, and the results were often stunning. Over its original 5-season run from 1959 to Music 1964, the series produced 156 episodes and secured its legacy through major industry accolades. Rod Serling personally won Primetime Emmy Awards for Outstanding Writing Achievement in Drama in 1960 and 1961. George T. Clements won a Primetime Emmy for Outstanding Cinematography in 1961. The show also dominated the science fiction community, winning the prestigious Hugo Award for Best Dramatic Music Presentation 3 consecutive times in 1960, 1961, and 1962. But behind the polished episodes and the glowing awards, the production of The Twilight Zone was marked by conflicts that the public music never saw. The battles between Serling and the censors did not end when the show went into production. The fights over scripts, the compromises forced by sponsors, music, and the pressure to deliver episodes on impossible schedules created an environment where accidents were inevitable. The dark side of The Twilight Zone. During the late 1950s and early 60s, Music Corp sponsors had a huge amount of control over what was included in television scripts. For modern viewers used to streaming services and commercial-free shows, that level of influence can be hard to imagine. The companies that paid for the airtime had the power to demand changes to dialogue, characters, and even entire plot lines if they believed that something in the episode might reflect poorly on their products or offend their customers. Serling, who had spent years fighting this system, found himself trapped inside it once again. He could hide social commentary inside science fiction stories, but he could not hide from the sponsor's notes that arrived music with every new script. During the production of an episode called Judgment Night, which was about the haunted journey of a German U-boat captain forced to relive his wartime sins, a corporate sponsor that supplied food products to American households forced producers to remove a single line of dialogue. The line was innocuous, a character music asking for a cup of tea. But the sponsor sold coffee, not tea, and the company feared that showing someone drinking tea on screen might hurt their coffee sales. The line was cut, and the episode aired without it. But Sorling learned once again that creative freedom had a price tag attached. The budgetary pressures on the show were even more damaging than the sponsor notes. During the second season, CBS executives grew furious over rising production costs and demanded that the crew find ways to spend less money on each episode. The solution they imposed was music brutal. They forced the production team to film 6 episodes entirely on cheap, primitive videotape instead of a high-quality 35mm film stock that gave the show its distinctive cinematic look. Each of these episodes was shot using a multi-camera videotape setup that lacked the music depth of field and visual richness of film. The result was flat and cheap, resembling a daytime soap opera rather than a cutting-edge science fiction series. The creative team was deeply upset by the results, and viewers noticed the difference immediately. The experiment was abandoned after those 6 episodes, but the footage had already been captured and broadcast, and those episodes remained visually jarring when watched music alongside the rest of the series. The grueling production schedule required music delivering up to 36 episodes per season, a workload that would break most writing staffs. Rod Serling did not have a writing staff, at least music, not in the modern sense. He single-handedly wrote 92 of the 156 episodes that aired during the show's original run. To keep up with the massive workload, he used a dictaphone machine and spent 12 to 14 hours a day speaking scripts into it while constantly smoking. He used this habit to calm himself and stay focused through the long hours. The habit would eventually cost him his life, but in the early 1960s, it was simply part of how he managed to keep working. The dictaphone allowed him to work faster than writing by hand or typing, but it also meant that his scripts were often rough, requiring extensive revisions before they were ready for production. The exhaustion was visible in his face, and friends who saw him during those years worried that he was working himself to death. The pressures of the schedule also created friction between Serling and other writers who contributed to the show. Renowned genre author Ray Bradbury was a close friend of Serling's, and Bradbury contributed the script for an episode called I Sing the Body Electric, which aired during the 3rd season. The collaboration should have been a celebration of 2 great minds working together. Instead, their friendship was permanently shattered when Bradbury publicly accused Serling of plagiarizing his concept for a different episode, a nostalgic piece called Music W. Alking Distance. Bradbury claimed that Serling had stolen ideas from his personal stories without giving him proper credit. And the accusation cut deep because its music came from someone Serling considered a friend and peer. The feud between them lasted for a long time, a bitter reminder that even the closest creative relationships can be destroyed by disputes over ownership and attribution. The plagiarism accusations did not stop with Bradbury. Kaga Productions and CBS Music faced a high-profile, multi-000 lawsuit over copyright infringement during the 3rd season, a case that the studio worked hard to keep out of the newspapers. Writer George Clayton Johnson had based his script for an episode called Kick the Can on a short story that he believed was his own original creation. However, a rival author filed a formal lawsuit claiming that the central music premise of the episode, elderly people reverting to childhood by playing children's games, was directly stolen from a pre-existing music-published work. The evidence was troubling enough that the studio chose to settle the matter quietly rather than risk a public trial. The settlement amount was never disclosed, but the fact of the settlement suggested that the rival author's claims had merit. These battles with sponsors, budgets, and plagiarism claims were exhausting. But they were not the only problems that plagued the production of The Twilight Zone. Behind the scenes, technical blunders and production slip-ups occurred with alarming frequency, and the producers tried very hard to hide the evidence from the audience. For decades, those mistakes were hidden by the low quality of old television sets. But now that the episodes have been remastered in high definition, the mistakes are impossible to miss. Production mistakes. Hiding in plain sight. One of the most famous episodes of the entire series is called To Serve Man, which first aired in 1962. The story features 9-foot-tall aliens called Canamites who come to Earth promising peace and prosperity. The twist ending, which still shocks first-time viewers, is that the aliens are not here to help. For 52 years, the encounter existed in a strange limbo. It was not destroyed, but it was not shown. Fans who wanted to see music, it had to track down bootleg copies or wait for the DVD releases, which were not subject to the same restrictions as broadcast television. The episode remained available on home video, but it never appeared on the annual marathons that introduced new generations to the Twilight Zone. It was the show's dirty secret, the episode that everyone had heard about, but almost no one had actually seen. When Sci-Fi finally aired the episode in 2016, the network did so with a content warning. The episode is still uncomfortable to watch, not because it is poorly made, but because its central lie has aged so badly. The performances by Neville and Take are music excellent. The tension is real, but the moment when Takamori confesses that his father was a traitor lands like a punch to the gut. Not because it is good drama, but because it is a lie that caused real harm to real people. George T., now an icon of both acting and activism, music, has made peace with his participat.